Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something that is frankly incredibly heavy, but absolutely vital to talk about. We're looking at one of Texas's most notorious, baffling, and truly haunting unsolved cases, the Austin yogurt shop murders. I want us to take a highly focused, respectful approach as we unpack this today. We're going to look at the hard facts, the tangled evidence, and the profound, deeply frustrating challenges that have kept this case completely shrouded in mystery for generations.
Let's start right at the beginning and trace the timeline of December 6, 1991. Picture this. It's the evening, just an ordinary, crisp Friday night in North Austin at a local spot called I Can't Believe It's Yogurt. The girls are working their normal shift, customers are coming and going buying ice cream. There is absolutely zero sign that anything is wrong. But as we move later into the night, the shop just goes eerily silent. A brutal, unimaginable attack takes place. And then comes the morning. Firefighters respond to a blaze at the shop, and they discover an absolutely horrific scene inside. The stark contrast between that completely normal everyday evening and this sudden, devastating nightmare of the next morning, it's just jarring, and it literally shocked the entire Austin community to its core.
But, to truly understand the gravity of this case, we have to ground our focus right here, on the victims. Because this isn't just a true crime timeline. This is about 4 young lives. Amy Ayers was just 13 years old. Sarah Harbison was 15. Her older sister, Jennifer Harbison, who was working the counter that night, was 17. And her good friend Eliza Thomas was also 17. These were daughters. They were sisters. They were best friends. Just teenagers with their whole entire lives ahead of them. Decades later, it's the loss of those bright futures that remains at the absolute heart of this tragedy.
Section 1. Evidence lost to fire. Let's look at the massive hurdle investigators faced literally the morning after the crime.
Now, think about what it takes to solve a crime of this magnitude. Police desperately need the basics, right? Clear fingerprints, intact DNA, hair fibers, and an undisturbed crime scene so they can piece together what happened. But instead, they were met with literal ash. They found severe water damage from the fire hoses and heavily compromised evidence. They had almost zero clear answers. Whoever did this deliberately set that building on fire, and in doing so, they destroyed the exact forensic puzzle pieces police desperately needed to figure out how a killer could commit this in a public business and just vanish. So, what happens next? Well, because of that massive loss of physical evidence, months dragged into years, and the investigation just struggled to find any definitive answers. Police did the legwork. They interviewed witnesses. They squeezed whatever they could from the damaged physical evidence. They chased down suspects. But that burned-out crime scene was just a massive roadblock. And the worst part? This lack of definitive proof left the victims' families without the one thing they desperately wanted and absolutely deserved: a clear explanation.
Section 2. The false climax. Fast forward with me to the late 1990s and early 2000s when suddenly a major breakthrough seemed to completely change the game.
And talk about a legal roller coaster. Years after the crime, suspects were finally identified. Authorities even managed to get confessions. The case went all the way to court, and 2 men, Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott, were convicted for the murders. You can imagine the public breathing this huge collective sigh of relief, thinking, okay, finally, a closed case. But then, an extraordinary shift happens. Both of those convictions were overturned. The authorities really believed they had nailed the killers, but suddenly the convictions vanished, and everyone, investigators, the public, the families, was thrown right back to square one.
Section 3. The limits of DNA. To really grasp why those convictions fell apart, we need to talk about the real-world limitations of forensic science.
It sounds like a super straightforward question, doesn't it? What does DNA actually prove? But let's think about this deeply in the context of this specific, very complicated case. As tech got better, investigators were able to re-examine some of that fire-damaged evidence from '91. But here's the catch. If you find DNA in a public business, does that automatically mean it belongs to the killer? It turns out finding a DNA profile doesn't magically solve the case. It actually just opens up a whole new can of worms.
Because this is the ultimate double-edged sword of DNA evidence. Think about a highly trafficked public place like a yogurt shop. If you find DNA, it could belong to one of the victims, it could be from a customer who just popped in for a sundae earlier that afternoon, it could be from a delivery driver, another employee, or yes, it could be the killer. Investigators had the incredibly tough job of establishing what that DNA actually meant in the context of the crime. Sorting out an innocent bystander from a murderer based on a microscopic speck of DNA, that became a monumental and incredibly difficult challenge. And all this ambiguity led to some severe doubts, both legally and publicly. People started asking a really terrifying question.
Had an innocent person, or even multiple people, been pulled into a murder case simply because authorities were desperate for answers? The controversy around those initial confessions was immense. You had prosecutors, defense attorneys, and top forensic experts all fundamentally disagreeing on how to interpret this fire-damaged evidence. So instead of finding clarity, the public was left looking at this deeply confusing picture, wondering if those initial convictions were the result of brilliant detective work or just a desperate rush to judgment to close a high-profile case.
Section 4. Decades of unanswered questions. Without any standing convictions, these families woke up to the exact same agonizing reality they faced on that horrific night back in 1991.
And what we're looking at here is the grim anatomy of a cold case. Have you ever wondered why it's so unbelievably hard to solve a crime decades later? Well, over time, key witnesses literally disappear or pass away. Human memories, which are already fragile, change, they fade, they become unreliable. Physical evidence deteriorates even further, which is especially tough for evidence that barely survived a massive fire to begin with. And as investigative techniques evolve, we sometimes learn that the older methods used in the case were flawed. It totally breaks down exactly why the truth gets harder and harder to reconstruct with every single passing year.
30. More than 30 years have passed since that December night. Just take a second and let that sink in. We are talking about 3 whole decades of evidence being tested and retested, 3 decades of different investigative teams coming and going, 3 decades of families waking up every day waiting for justice. The sheer passage of time here has firmly cemented the Austin yogurt shop murders as one of America's most deeply haunting cold cases. But, and this is absolutely crucial to remember, the truth may still be out there. The answers could still exist. They might be buried deep in old evidence boxes, hidden away in some forgotten records, or maybe locked within a clue that everyone saw but just totally misunderstood. The final piece of this giant puzzle could be an overlooked detail, or maybe it's locked away in the memory of someone out there who has simply never spoken publicly about what they know.
Which brings us right back to this ultimate agonizing question. Who killed Amy, Sarah, Jennifer, and Eliza? 4 young girls went to their neighborhood yogurt shop for an ordinary Friday night shift, and they never came home. Until this question is answered with absolute certainty, this mystery is going to continue to echo through the streets of Austin. As you process everything we've unpacked in this explainer, the devastating fire, the wild legal twists, the incredible complexities of DNA, I really want you to ponder this unresolved tragedy. How on earth does a killer just vanish into the night, leaving a mystery that haunts us for generations? Thanks so much for joining me on this one, and as always, keep asking the hard questions.